Okay, now we're going to learn to estimate irrational numbers. Estimating irrational numbers. Irrational numbers are numbers that are not rational. In other words, they cannot be written in the form a over b, where a and b are integers and b is not 0. Square roots of perfect squares are rational numbers. Square roots of numbers that are not perfect squares are irrational. Square roots of numbers that are not perfect squares are irrational. The number, the square root of 3, is irrational because 3 is not a perfect square of any rational number. Estimate the value of the square root of 2. A. Since 2 is not a perfect square, the square root of 2 is irrational. B. To estimate the square root of 2, first find two consecutive perfect squares that 2 is between. Complete the inequality by writing these perfect squares in the boxes. Alright, so 2, or the square root of 2, will lie between the perfect squares for 1 and 4. 1 and 4. Now take the square root of each number. So, square root of 1, square root of 4. Simplify the square roots of perfect squares. The square root of 1 is 1, and the square root of 4 is 2. D. Simplify the square roots of a perfect square. So the square root of 2 is between 1 and 2. The square root of 2 is between 1 and 2. Alright, now for those of us who are completely lost, okay, what you're going to have to do is this. First, list about 4 numbers in consecutive order. That is 1, 2, 3, and 4. Next, you're going to square these numbers. So 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16. After that, you put square root symbols over each of the numbers. Square root, square root, square root, and square root. And then you ask yourself, the square root of 2, where does it fit in amongst those square roots? Well, the square root of 2 will lie in between the square root of 1 and the square root of 4. That's why here we put a 1 there and a 4 there. And you can see the square root of 2 is in between those. So, what is the square root of 1? 1. What's the square root of 4? 2. That means whatever the answer is for the square root of 2, we know it's between 1 and 2. Now, normally starting off, to get a general estimate, all you would do is pick halfway. So halfway between 1 and 2 is 1.5. All right, now if you knew what you were doing, you wouldn't have to do this part up here. You can simply just start off by knowing that 1 is a perfect square and that 4 is a perfect square. Now, how do we know it's a perfect square? Because what's the square root of 4? 2. 2 times 2 is 4. What's the square root of 1? 1. 1 times 1 is 1. Okay, now as indicated on the previous step, we estimated that the square root of 2 is approximately 1.5. All right, so if we had it on the number line, we would see then that the square root of 2, which is 1.5, is going to be between 1 and 2. But here in F, it says to find a better estimate, first choose some numbers between 1 and 2 and square them. For example, choose 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5. Notice they're between 1 and 2. All right, now, so we're going to square those. So 1.3 squared is equal to 1.69. Now, don't forget, squared means times itself. So 1.3 times 1.3. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 1 is 3. 1 times 3 is 3. And 1 times 1 is 1. Don't forget, I'm reviewing maybe 3rd and 4th grade math with you right here. Don't forget that that second row starts off indented. There's like a 0 there, then that's there. So then we add going down. 9 plus 0 is 9. 3 plus 3 is 6. And then 0 plus 1 is 1. We got 2 decimal places, so we had to count in 1 here, 1 there. So that means we got to count in 2 down here. 1, 2. So that's 1.69. All right, so we use the same technique when we multiply 1.4 squared. So 1.4 squared is 1.4 times 1.4. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 1 is 4. Plus 1 is 5. 1 times 4 is 4. Don't forget that 4 goes right there. And 1 times 1 is 1. We add going down, we get 6. Here we get 5 plus 4, which is 9. And then we get 1. We count in 2 places. So we end up 2 places down here, 1.96. So that's 1.96. And for 5, we came out with 1.5 times 1.5. Excuse me, for 1.5 squared, we came out with 1.5 times 1.5. 5 times 5 is 25. Carry a 2. 5 times 1 is 5. Plus 2 is 7. 1 times 5 is 5. And 1 times 1 is 1. Add going down. 5 plus 0 is 5. 7 plus 2 is 12. And then we carry a 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. So here we get the answer 225. So when we answer this question, is the square root of 2 between 1.3 and 1.4? How do we know? Well, the answer is going to be no, because 2 does not lie between 1.69 and 1.96. All right. Now, is the square root of 2 between 1.4 and 1.5? How do we know? The answer is yes. And the reason why is that 2 does lie between 1.96 and 2.25. Now, because the square root of 2 lies between 1.96 and 2.25, that means we know that it's between 1.4 and 1.5. So the square root of 2 is approximately or congruent to 1.45. Now, how do we come up with 1.45? Real easy. Look at the 1 and the 1. That stays the same. Now look at 5. Look at 4 and 5. Look at 4 and 5. What's halfway between 40 and 50? 45. All right. Pretend there's a 0 there and pretend there's a 0 there. So halfway would be 45. So that would be our most accurate estimate without using a calculator. Okay, and if we were to graph that, we will come out with 1.45 is in between 1.4 and 1.5. All right, now on problem 13 here, I'm going to show you how to estimate square root using a slightly different technique than what they're showing you, and it can be just as accurate. Here we go. Estimate the value of the square root of 7 to 2 decimal places. Draw a number line and locate and label your estimate. So I list my numbers 1, 2, and 3. This is for those of us who may have issues. So I got 1, 2, 3. I could have put down 4, 5, 6, but 1, 2, and 3 would be enough. And then I'm going to square all the numbers. 1 squared is 1. 2 squared is 4. 3 squared is 9. Then I'm going to put square root symbols around each one. Square root symbols. And then I ask myself, where does the square root of 7 fall? In between which two? So the square root of 7 falls between the square root of 4 and the square root of 9. 4, 7, 9. All right, so now, what's the square root of 4? 2. What's the square root of 9? 3. So I know then that the square root of 7 is going to be halfway between 2 and 3. That's my first estimate, halfway between 2 and 3. So now, the square root of 7 I'm coming out with is 2.5. Now, slightly different than their technique, what I'm going to do is this. I ask myself, the 7, is it closer to the 4 or is it closer to the 9? In this case, 7 is closer to 9. So then that tells me that the square root of 7 has to be greater than 2.5. Remember now, the square root of 9 is 3. But we know that the square root of 7 has got to be a little bit greater than 2.5. Now, since they say the 2 decimal places, I'm going to put down 2.65. That's a very close estimate. And then, of course, I will plot that on this number line here. Okay, now the way I came out with the 2.65 was, okay, remember I said that the 7 was closer to the 9. So that rules out 2.5. It has to be greater than 2.5. So I'm saying that it has to be between 2.6 and 2.7. Remember now, the 2's are in common, so that's 2. Halfway between 60, pretend that's a 0, and 70 is 65. So that's how I came up with 2.65. And then I graphed that on the number line. Here I have 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, 2.8, 2.9. So 2.65 is halfway between 2.6 and 2.7. And there I have my point plotted.